Sam, thank you so much for being here today. We're super excited to get to interview you. I would love if you could introduce yourself.
And I am delighted to be here, Courtney. My name is Sam Foster. I am, as you know, and the reason you invited me, an author. I originally grew up in the Midwest, Illinois specifically. My father was a bit of a gypsy. I have always been reminded of him in the old Western song about being the next of kin to the wayward wind. But until I came to Los Angeles to go to college, and until I came to Los Angeles to go to school, I had never gone to the same school more than 2 years in a row in my life. We constantly moved. When I came to Los Angeles to school, Los Angeles is a hard place to learn to love because it's geographically so big. I have lived in Washington, D.C. I've lived in New York City. And the comparison I make to New York City is in New York City, all you have to do is fall out of your room and everything's in front of you. In Los Angeles, you can find everything you can find in New York, but you have to drive an hour to get there. You have to learn to love the city. But I was in college, so I learned to love it before I was through school. When I got out of school, I graduated from college just in time that every man in America who graduated that year had a choice for a graduation trip. And the choices were Canada or Vietnam. So I joined the Marine Corps only because I thought I would look cuter in blues than I would in Army greens. I gave the Marine Corps only what I was obligated to give them and got out and went to work. I have always been a bit of a historian. That's what my degree is in. And I've always liked it and I've always read it. But I was, Courtney, as a young man, simply unwilling to starve for art. So I didn't start writing until I had 2 kids, a mortgage mostly paid off, a little money in the bank. I simply immersed myself in the business community because I wasn't willing to starve. And I wrote my first book came out when I was about 45, I guess. And my first 2 novels were written while I was still in the business community. I always amuse myself. That is the one thing that Raymond Chandler and I have in common. Our first 2 books were published when we were executives in downtown Los Angeles. I hope I end up being as fortunate and as well-read as he was. But for the last 5 years, writing has been my work. It is what I do. It is what gives me purpose in life. And what I have been working on for the last 5 years was a book that has now come out as the American Trilogy. Courtney, when I wrote it, I thought it was one story. And I wrote it as one story. I wrote the manuscript as a single story. And the manuscript was 1,300 pages long. So I was given a choice. It was a pretty good story. I was given a choice. I could have it published as a single story and nobody would read it because Americans do not read Tolstoy-esque length novels, or I could cut it into a trilogy. And it cut into a trilogy fairly easily, but perhaps I should back off from that because all you've asked me to do is introduce myself and I have done that.
Amazing. Well, the next part is going into, we would love if you would tell us what your books are about.
Sure. I have a friend, had a friend, Al's dead now, who had a little bit of fame in that he was UCLA's first football All-American. His name was Al Sparlas. And Al was a most interesting and eccentric man, but he was a 185-pound center on UCLA's 41, 42, and 45 football teams. Now, if you follow that at all, that means there's a 2-year gap. And that's because Al, like so many guys in that era, went off and fought World War II. And in Al's case, he flew with Chenault over the Burma Hump into China. He also flew in the Korean War. He was one of only 7 pilots in his squadron to come back alive. And Al flew in Vietnam as well. And he was so old in Vietnam, they weren't going to let him back in. He's probably the most forceful personality I've ever met. But Al insisted, and so they let him back, and he flew back and forth to Hawaii. He would fly soldiers going over and dead soldiers coming back. He was flying soldiers in coffins back and forth. But he flew in 3 of America's wars. I only tell you Al's background because Al said something once that was so memorable to me. I always write books and I try to follow that. But Al said, the measure of a man is the things for which he is willing to die. And my books tend to be about that. They tend to be male dominated. American business community in an era before women were not common in it. The United States Marine Corps, the fight for the old Northwest Territory, the American Midwest. They tend to be male-dominated stories because I understand men better than women. I'm trying to write a book right now from a woman's voice, and I'm not sure I can do it, but I'm trying. But Al's comment was, the measure of a man is the things for which he is willing to die. And so my stories tend to be about harsh choices where men are pushed against a wall and the things they think they believe about themselves are questioned in the extreme until they have to make a decision about what kind of a man they really are. That's generally what my writing falls into. And I admit I'm cutting off a lot of your audience when I say that, but it does tend to be male dominated. That's simply what I write about.
What inspired you to write your books?
The stories I write, the stories that I like when I read, Courtney, have more than a good plot and a couple of characters I like. They also tend to teach me about a world I do not know. And I like that. I like, one of my favorites was Dune. Who would have ever thought that stuff up that Frank Herbert thought up about simply a world that you didn't know at all. But by the time he finished with you, you did feel like you knew that planet and that system and so forth. My very favorite writer is Steve Pressfield, and Stephen Pressfield writes tremendous novels about ancient Greece, things that I had no idea about by the time I end up reading I do. So my stories tend to be about things I understand. I was in the Marine Corps. I wrote a story about the Marine Corps. I was in American business. My first novel is a business hustle in Los Angeles. I know Los Angeles very well. I know business in Los Angeles very well. So I could give people a world they may not know. But the thing that I'm doing, which I think is most important, and I know this sounds a little arrogant, Courtney, but I do tend to think of it as the reason God put me on earth, is this trilogy. And the trilogy is a history of the Northwest Territories, which became the American Midwest. So a history of Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, and Michigan. And that book runs 230 years from it's not one book, it's 3 of them now, from 1769 to 1999. And the reason I think I know something about that, the book is a bit Michener-esque in that I picked one spot on the map, the Mascoutin Bay on the Illinois River, and watched 230 years fall over that same spot. That spot happens to be my ancestral home. And so again, I'm writing about something that I know well enough that I think I may be able to introduce my readers to a world they don't know at all. So those are the things that I have written about so far. But I told you that I am now writing a story from a woman's voice, and that is about something I know nothing about. So it will be an incredible stretch for me to try to tell a story that's interesting to readers in a world that I had to learn to teach them about, as opposed to a world that I already knew.
Amazing. When you were writing your books, who were you thinking of when it comes to who your books are for?
I think my audience is probably men between the ages of 25 and 55 would be my guess. And I I guess I guess that's because that's the world I know. That's the personality I know. I would have a very hard time making you one of my characters because I don't know the world you live in. I don't know North Dakota. I don't know the impulse to be a podcaster. Um, I, I don't know anything about being a woman. You would be very hard for me to write. So I guess I'm writing things that are easy for me. I don't know. I've never thought about it until you asked me that, Courtney, and I'm a little embarrassed at my own answer.
No, I think it was a great answer that you're writing for what you know and you're sharing your knowledge with people who can connect with you.
I guess that's right. I think you said it better than I did. Thank you, Courtney. I'll remember that.
Yeah. How long have you been writing and what made you really sit down and start writing?
First story I ever wrote, I was a junior in high school. And it was so bad that even my sister, who loved me, had a hard time complimenting on it. And then when I got to college, um, as I said, my degree was in history. So I took a lot of liberal arts courses. So there were a lot of writings of papers. And I wasn't terribly good at that either. I mean, I had to learn and learn very slowly. By the time I was a 40-year-old businessman, my memos and general writings, little white papers, were good enough that a lot of young people would come to me and say, would you help me write this? And I would always give them the same answer. If you want me to review that, I will, but I'm going to tell you what I think. I'm not going to be polite. But I think I just learned over time having to do it. I think it was like most things in life. The only way I ever really learned to do it was being forced to, because my first attempt had been an abject failure, and I didn't want to try that again. The thing that may have made me really think to write, and it's a question I like writers to ask writers, but only twice in my life has the muse ever come to sit on my shoulder. And literally, I have had two occasions in life, Courtney, where I did nothing but take dictation as fast as I was right. It was being given to me. And one of those was literally about a business memo when I was about 40 years old. And I pulled over off the Interstate 5 and pulled onto the shoulder and grabbed a scrap of paper and just started scribbling as fast as I could because it was coming to me perfectly. And that memo got a little famous, and it was just a memo. But I think that convinced me. I think that was a point at which I started to transition from business writing to personal writing, is that the muse had given me that gift, even though it was a business memo. But now when I write, I don't expect it. As I said, it's only happened to me twice, and I expect writing to be work. I don't know if you're familiar with any of Stephen Pressfield's work. I mentioned him earlier, but Stephen Pressfield recently came out with a book called The War of Art. And it's obviously a play on the famous Sun Tzu military manuscript, The Art of War, written by a 5th century BC Chinese. And he says in that, and his book is like Stephen King's book. It's about how to write. It's to other writers how to write. And Pressfield says that he and I share that we are both Marines. And he says in his book that the Marine Corps taught him more about writing than any other lesson because the Marine Corps teaches men to love misery. And when you write, you just have to do it. You have to sit down in front of the keyboard, whether you're inspired, whether you want to, whether you've got it in you that morning or not. You have to simply sit down and pound the keyboard. You can go back and edit the hell out of it later. But when you write, you have to simply write. It has to be discipline.
Love that. What is your schedule like when you are writing a book?
When I'm researching a book, and all of my writing in the last 5 years has been historic fiction. And so when you're researching a book, you can read, you can pull books down, you can get on the internet, I don't know how people did historic research before Google. I mean, it's so easy to ask Google a question about a name or a person or a date that when I was a kid, I'd have to go to the library and look it up, and it would take forever. So when I'm researching, my schedule can be flexible. I can plug things in and say, yeah, I can do this for you today, or yeah, I can come over and we can have a 2-hour lunch, or yeah, I can go to the gym, or yeah, I can do whatever it is I want to do. I can do that in research. But when I start to write, I do tend to close off the world. I mean, there are minimum things we have to do. There are people that love us we have to show up for. We have obligations we can't junk. But mostly when I write from about 10 in the morning until about 3 in the afternoon, with a very short lunch in the middle. And I grind on it. I crank it out until I've got a first draft. Once I've got the first draft, when I edit, I can go back to a more casual schedule. But when I'm writing, I write. That's what I do.
Love that. That's amazing. What do you need in your writing space to help you stay focused?
So fun you ask that. Nobody's ever asked me that, Courtney. Courtney, I have 2 things that are in front of me that are magic. And I wish I had them here with me now, but I don't write without them. One of them sits on a small coffee table in front of my desk. And it is a wooden statue about 15 inches high of St. John, done by Mexican-American natives. So very primitive in style. The shop I bought it from in Puerto Vallarta told me, and it's got a little halo on the top of its head. It's a little wooden statue with a stem that sticks up and a halo around it. And it also comes with a book stand and a pen and writing on the book stand. And the book stand stands in front of the statue. They're 2 separate pieces. And the shop I bought it from in Puerto Vallarta told me that the native who did it said it was St. John. And I don't know if you or any of your audience are Christians, but the Gospel of St. John starts, in the beginning, there was the Word. That's the first sentence in St. John. So the native thought the writer was St. John. So I put St. John writing right in front of me. I am looking at him. I can look up over the top of my computer and see it. The other thing, and it sits right behind my computer, it literally hides behind the back of the computer where the cords plug in, is a thing I bought in a Maasai village in Kenya. And it is it's 1-piece wood, and it's a round ball about this big with a long handle on it. And at the end of the handle, there's a little notch to keep your hand from slipping off. And everybody thinks because it's Maasai that it's a war club, because they're known as famous warriors. It's not. It's quite the other way around. You hold the hand and you squat down on your knees and you write with the other end in the dust. It is called a talking stick. So I have my magic pieces in front of me. I have St. John's writing and I have my talking stick, and they're right in front of me where I can see it when I write. I hate to sound like I'm that superstitious, but those are my pieces. Those are what I have in front of me.
I love it. It's so unique. What are your favorite writing snacks and drinks?
Oh my, coffee. And I tend not to snack, and it's because it tends, as I say, I'm good for, when I was younger, I could concentrate longer, but I'm good for at most about 5 hours. And then I start to misspell words, lose concentration, don't have creativity in my words, sound like I'm speaking like I'm in 8th grade instead of like I've been writing all my life. And so my brain's only good for that for about 5 hours. And literally, I'll drink coffee, but I won't eat when I'm doing that.
Amazing.
But I don't get by without coffee. If God were to take coffee from the earth, I think I'd probably wither up and die. I've had 3 cups already this morning just in preparation for you. So,
Love it. What type of books do you personally enjoy reading?
I like novels. I do read nonfiction works, but I read them out of a sense of duty to know what's going on in the world. It's not that I read them out of joy. I don't. What I read out of joy are novels. And there are for me, and I'm not sure this falls too far off the mainstream, but sort of 2 kinds of writings. And I, Courtney, am a storyteller. I am not a literary writer. And I like stories, and I like stories that move fairly fast. But when they move fast, they, for me as a reader, need to hold together in consistency. And my characters, the thing that I most dislike that will almost make me put a book down and give up is authors who make their characters do what the author wants them to do when they haven't created a character that would do that. And we all see it all the time. When all of a sudden a character does something that you've got no context or background for, you have no idea why that person would behave that way. So I like stories that move quickly, but have consistency in the behavior of the characters in the book. That's the main thing. Now, there are writers who are very literary, who do things with the English language that I look at and go, oh God, I wish I could do that. Among my favorites among them, and I don't know if any of you or your writers have read them, but is a Spaniard, and I'm not sure he'd call himself a Spaniard. He might call himself a Catalan because he's from Barcelona. But his name is Carlos Ruiz Zafón. And he writes books, mostly fictional books, mostly mysteries, and mostly every one of his that I've ever read is set in Barcelona. And he writes in Spanish, although he has a house in Los Angeles, so obviously his English is very accomplished. But it's just magic. It's poetry. It's like reading poetry, but it's not. It's prose. He can just do things with words. But I can't do it. And as much as I love it, it's just not me, and I can't write that way. But I do like to read some of it.
Amazing. Are there any books or authors that inspired you to become a writer?
James Michener. I read Hawaii the summer I turned 16. So I was 15 and 16. I was and still am a bit of a slow reader. And I can remember sitting on the couch, laying on the couch. I worked as a bag boy in a grocery store in a market that was 2 blocks away, so I could run to work. And I can remember laying on the couch, looking at my watch, wanting to read just one more chapter before I had to get up and run to work. But I have always, I've read most of the things that Michener has done, I've read. And I absolutely love that style, which I have clearly copied in, if I can tout it, this is the first book in my trilogy. And you can see right there when I hold it up close, it says the American Trilogy, Book 1, a novel. I've clearly copied his style. I picked the Mascoutin Bay on the Illinois River and written almost 1,200 pages on that spot, spanning over 230 years. So I've got to say he's probably my biggest inspiration. If I have an inspiration that simply wanted to make me write, it would be Mark Twain. I grew up in the Midwest, and when I was a kid, all of that stuff was school literature. Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer were all school literature. and they were all about places I knew. They were near me, they were around me. I grew up on the Illinois River. He was the Mississippi River right down the road. Um, and 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 I think when I read Twain when I was a little kid, I thought, gee, I would like to do that. I'd like to be able to do that.
Amazing. What type of books did you grow up reading? Did you have an all-time favorite?
I'm trying to think back what I grew up reading. And aside from that story that I just told you about Michener's Hawaii, I think when I was a kid, most of what I read were school books and text. I don't think I was like a lot of kids. I was an athlete in high school and college. I didn't come from money. I had to work. I got my first job when I was 15 years old because a friend of my dad's was willing to lie and say I was 16 and get me in the union. I don't think I read a lot on my own. I think between work and athletics that I had time for school, and that was about it. And forgive me, what was the second half of your question? It was two parts, Courtney.
It was if you had an all-time favorite.
Oh, I have three, and I love them so much I can't separate them. And these will tell you something about what I read. I absolutely love Stephen Pressfield. And among Pressfield's books, I have so hard a time and differentiate them, but I have to pick one. It would be Gates of Fire. Gates of Fire being a very crude English translation of Thermopylae. And so it is the battle of the 300 Spartans that held off the 1,000,000 Persians at Thermopylae. But I will tell you the thing I particularly like about that book, it's not really so much about the Battle of Thermopylae. It's not even about why 300 men would stand and die. If you know that story, you will know that every one of them knew they were going to die when they went there. It was about Sparta and what kind of society produces 300 men who will stand and die because they were told to. And we all know, everybody who's literary in America knows about Athens. We all grew up reading things about Athens and know about Athens, but we don't know about their great enemy. We don't. And Pressfield told us what life was like in Sparta. That's what I really liked about it. The other one, and this is completely different, but I absolutely love East of Eden. And that's different than what I usually read, but I mean, Steinbeck is one of those people who can do anything with words. But that book is essentially about three literary men who have regular dinner together. And the only thing they have in common is that they are literary. One of them is very rich, one of them is very poor, one of them is Chinese who is very well educated. And there is a line in Genesis where Cain has killed Abel and God comes and seeks him out. And God says to him, sin lieth at thy door, and thou shalt overcome it. And what these three men debate about, Courtney, is the meaning of the word shall. Ancient Hebrew is a very primitive language, only about 1,500 words. So there's no sophistication in it. And so does shall mean shall? Or does it mean will? Or does it mean may? Easy translations of the same word, and they all have a complete difference in what God means. If he says, we shall overcome sin, then it's a promise. If he says, we may overcome sin, it's a challenge. Will you or won't you? And so around that one simple little word, he creates a 600-page book. And I'm a man of words, so I like it. Um, and then the other one that I like so very, very much is Killer Angels. And Killer Angels is about the Battle of Gettysburg. It is specifically about the third day holding Little Round Top. And the two main characters in Killer Angels are a guy who was an academic at Bowdoin College in Maine, who after the war went back and became the president of Bowdoin College. He was an absolute academic. And his top sergeant was an Irishman who had been trained by the British in warfare. Completely different backgrounds. And at one point, the intellectual says, man is an angel. And the old Irishman says to him, he always calls him Darlin because he's Irish. And he says, Colonel Darlin, if man is an angel, he's a killer angel. Those are my three favorite, and you can tell they all have a great deal in common. I think they all fit into what I said about the kind of things that I try to write.
Love that. As an adult, what are your favorite series or authors that if they come out with something new, you're going to automatically grab it?
Stephen Pressfield. The thing I'm struggling with now, I'm an old man and I'm struggling with the name. How can I have him on my list of when he comes up, pop up, and I can't even remember his name. He is the guy who wrote the Sharpie series about the British battles that end up in the Battle of Waterloo. Oh, I'm embarrassed, but I do not remember the man's name. But those are the only two that I absolutely follow, that every time they come up with a new book, I buy it automatically.
Amazing.
And again, they both write about the kinds of things I say about myself. They both are very male dominated, and they are both about life and death choices.
Amazing. What would you tell someone just starting out with reading again?
It's the most wonderful thing that will ever happen to you. Read, read, read. Do you know those are the first three words of the Quran? Read, read, read. And then he says, and the Quran is dictation from the angel Gabriel. And Muhammad says, I don't know how to read. And the angel Gabriel says, learn. That's how the Quran starts. And I believe it. Read, read, read. It is all the wisdom of the whole world, everybody before you. It's all the joy. It's all of the sorrow. Everything that is man is recorded there for you, good, evil, joyous, painful. And it's in any library or now on any computer like you and I are talking, to just pick it up and take that from the whole history of Earth. I don't sound like I'm in love with reading or anything, do I?
I love it. On the other side of that, what would you tell someone just starting to write their own book?
I can't tell you how often I get asked this. I cannot tell you how often I get asked this. And I guess the fundamental question, that I am given to understand that there's 60 million books in print, and that 4,500 books per day are copywritten in the United States of America. I think the question for an author, maybe it's the question for me, maybe I'm answering this about myself, is what is it you want? Why are you doing this? If you want money or fame, you have to write not your story. You have to write what the world is buying. You have to write what's on the bestseller list. You have to write in a style that is easily sold. You have to write in a style that is going to get you an agent. You have to write the kinds of things that Simon and Schuster wants to publish. Not what's in your heart, not the stories you have to tell, but what does the marketplace want? If, in fact, you feel that you have stories that you simply want to tell, then you can write anything you want. And if you write stories that you want to tell, even if you're a good writer, you're probably going to have to self-publish. And so there's going to be, you're not only not going to make money writing, it's going to cost you to write if you want somebody to read it. So before you start this journey, decide what you want and then pursue that path. Because they're very different paths. They're very different paths.
Love that. What's one thing that people are generally surprised to find out about you?
Then I'm religious. I have mentioned it a couple of times in this interview, but obliquely, not said it directly. And I am a Californian who is a Marine, who is an athlete, who lives at the beach, who doesn't live a lifestyle that people envision as sitting in church on Sunday mornings. But I would be a lost human being without God. And I try not to wear that on my sleeve. And if you hadn't asked me that question, I wouldn't have said it.
Is there anything you would like to say or add?
Courtney, I think you're a brilliant interviewer. You have not only asked me every question that sorts of has sucked me dry on what I may have to say that's interesting about my own writing. You have asked me things. You've asked me two questions that nobody's ever asked me that I've never even thought of. I can't think of anything to add, but may I do one thing, and you can edit it out if you want. But this is book 2 of the American Trilogy. Book 3 is not out yet. It will be out in the spring, but you will notice a similarity of style, of artistic style between the two covers. Books that appeal to me when I'm in a Barnes and Noble and I see a book cover from 10 feet away, it has to be a single image to draw my attention. It cannot be complicated or I don't even see it going by. I mean, I may be going to look for a book and I may be going to look for that book, and so I'll pick it up. But if it's not a large single image, it doesn't attract me from any distance. A lot of large single images also don't attract me because they evoke subjects in which I'm not interested. But the thing I wanted to say about those particular faces is that they are drawn by an artist of such fame that the Smithsonian owns one of her murals, and she just does them for me out of kindness. So I really like my covers, I guess is what I'm saying. I really like my covers. I don't know that the books are any damn good, but I like the covers.
I love that. That's so amazing. Where's the best place for readers to find your book? I know some readers love signed copies. Is that an option and the best place that they can connect with you?
Let's see. They can, I don't have it with me, but let me give it to you, and then you can do anything with it you want. But my webpage is www.samfosterbooks.com. Not very complicated. They'll find out everything about my books, about what I have written, and more about me than they ever would want to know there. My books are available pretty much anywhere. They're certainly available on Amazon. Barnes and Noble has them in their catalog. Most Barnes and Noble stores don't have them. As you probably know, Barnes and Noble has two ways of accepting a book. One way is that their national buyer buys it and send it out to all the bookstores, so all the bookstores have it. The other way is that they accept it into their catalog, and if individual bookstores want to pick it up, they can. Mine are in the latter category. So they are not automatically in any Barnes and Noble, but any Barnes and Noble can get them for you. They're printed by Ingram Spark, so virtually every bookstore in America gets their books from Ingram Spark. So they may not find them on the shelf at a bookstore, but any bookstore in America can get them for them. I think the bookstores that tend to have them are bookstores that I have toured, and I have had 2 tours of the Midwest because that's what the current series is about. One in Indiana and one about to come up 10 days from now in the state of Illinois. So if your listeners are there, a Barnes and Noble may well have them. But if they're in North Dakota, they're probably going to have to ask the Barnes and Noble to order them. They're entirely available through Amazon. Hardbound, softbound, Kindle version, Audible version, all the full Monty. And libraries, as you probably know, are a little tougher. Libraries have to be sort of convinced to take on a title one at a time. I live in Los Angeles, so I have convinced both the county library system and the city library system in Los Angeles County to take them on. But outside of Los Angeles, if they're generally available in libraries, I don't know. That's as complete of an answer as I've got to that one, Courtney.
Amazing. Do you offer signed copies?
The only places that have signed copies that I know of are Barnes and Noble stores that I have toured in Indiana, Illinois, or Southern California, where all the copies you leave behind, as you know, they tend to ask authors to sign them. As for me signing them, I have asked I have had friends ask me to sign them. And I have done that, but it costs damn near as much to mail a book back to you as it does to buy the book. So if a complete stranger wrote me a note and said, would you sign me a book? I'd probably say, I love you dearly, but I don't know how to answer that question, Courtney. That sounds so harsh when I say it. Maybe you'll edit it out for me and not put that in there. I don't know.
No, that's totally fine. It makes a lot of sense because, like, with shipping going up and everything, we just asked because some people do have it on their websites where you can check out and then it's shipped from the author themselves. So I just wanted to make sure if you had that option that they knew that it was available.
Can I say this and you edit it out if you want to? I am not in the business of selling books. I am in the business of writing books. And when bookstores turn me down on tours, they generally say to me, well, you bring in books and we'll split the proceeds. I don't know how authors do it. I'd have to buy the book. I'd have to carry the book with me. I'd have to keep a register of how many books I left with who. I would have to dun people for checks not sent to me, and I would have to pay to having books shipped back after they've had them too long to sell them. I simply don't know how authors do that. I've never figured out how to do it. I'm not willing to.
Amazing. I really appreciate you being open and honest with us about it because some of these listeners might be up and coming authors and they might not know that there is a cost to it and they might jump in without realizing that there's.
And other authors may know systems that I don't know. Maybe I think that's more complicated than it is, but I can't figure out how to do that.
Wow. We really appreciate your open honesty about it. And we're so grateful you came on today and that we got the chance to interview you. And we will be sure to drop your links in the show notes. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Courtney. The first podcast that's ever interviewed me. This is a first for me. Thank you for it.